My narcissist mom kicked me out at 19 for her real family. Years later she begged me for money, so I tricked her and exposed everything. I'm a 25-year-old woman now, but I got kicked out of my home 6 years ago, right around the time my mom, who was 45 then, and my stepdad, who was 49, had my half-sister. My mom had me when she was really young, and her family, her parents and grandparents, were extremely strict and old-fashioned. They were the kind of folks who believed in doing things the right way, and that included forcing her to have me, even though she didn't want to. From what I've been told, she hadn't even worked up the courage to tell them she was pregnant. But then my dad, clueless as ever, found out and went ahead and called both sets of parents before she had a chance to say a word. Apparently, she had just taken a pregnancy test, and the moment he saw the result, he thought it was big news they should all know. He never even stopped to ask her how she felt about it or if she was ready to talk. Pretty boneheaded move, honestly, but that's just typical of him. Unsurprisingly, their relationship didn't last long after that. Since they were never married, the breakup itself was pretty straightforward. They had met in college, dated for about a year, and then got pregnant. But after that stunt my dad pulled, my mom cut him off. Only problem was, she couldn't just pretend I didn't exist. Her family already knew, and they made it crystal clear if she got rid of the baby, they'd cut her off completely. So, she went through with the pregnancy. I know all this because she's told me the story more times than I can count. She likes to remind me just how lucky I am to be alive, because if it had been up to her, I wouldn't be here at all. Real heartwarming stuff to hear from your own mother, right? According to her, I'm basically the result of my dad's stupidity, and that somehow makes me even more irritating to her than I'd normally be. That's the vibe I grew up with, which is probably why I learned early on to make myself as invisible as possible. Her parents and grandparents fought to make sure I was born, but none of them gave much thought to what would happen to me after. My childhood? Let's just say it was rough, to put it lightly. You've already got a picture of how my mom was, but my dad wasn't much better. She resented me because she never wanted a kid in the first place, and she blamed me for every setback in her life. She believed I ruined her chances at building a better career, said she had to juggle college, work, and raising me. And honestly, I get that it was hard. But holding that against me, a literal child, and treating me like I was a curse? That's more than just unfair, it's cruel. To be clear, I wasn't starving or living without toys. My grandparents were footing the bill for everything because my dad couldn't afford child support. So materially, I had what I needed. But emotionally? I always felt like I was just this heavy weight on her shoulders. She never said anything kind to me. Never hugged me. Never praised me when I accomplished something. Living with her felt more like crashing in the apartment of a grumpy older roommate who couldn't stand you and just wanted you gone. Now, my dad, he was a lot easier to be around. He wasn't mean or cold like my mom, but the man had no clue how to be a parent. Looking back now, I'm pretty certain he was dealing with drug issues, weed, at the very least. When I was a kid, I didn't know what the strange smell in his apartment was or why he acted so weird sometimes. He'd say the oddest things, stuff that seemed funny at the time, but thinking about it now, it's clear he wasn't in the best shape. Still, he showed up for the big stuff. Holidays, birthdays, monthly dinners. He made an effort. My mom, on the other hand, couldn't stand him, and I heard them fighting constantly, always about how unreliable he was. She didn't want to raise me, but she ended up stuck with me anyway. Her family had already decided my dad wasn't responsible enough to have custody, and honestly, they weren't wrong. Before I was born, they made the call my mom would be the primary parent. My dad could visit, but only on weekends, and not until I was old enough. So until I turned 10, I was with my mom full-time. My dad would only pop in a few times a month. After I turned 10, I started spending weekends at his place. But that came with its own challenges. His apartment was tiny, and you could smell weed the moment you walked in. It was clear he was struggling financially. He never had a steady job, which my mom never stopped complaining about. She used to say that if my dad weren't such a screw-up, she could have shipped me off to him for at least half the week and gotten some peace, but her family wouldn't allow it. When I stayed with him, I could tell it was hard on him. I mean, the man could barely afford to feed himself, let alone me. He lived on a single meal a day sometimes, and obviously, that wouldn't cut it for a growing kid. Even so, he tried. He'd do silly things to make me laugh and try to make my weekends with him feel special. But the truth is, I never felt truly comfortable in either home. During the week, I had to deal with my mom constantly reminding me that I wasn't wanted. On the weekends, I had to watch my dad fumble his way through parenting while barely holding it together. Then when I was about 15, my mom started dating a guy named Jeffrey. He eventually became my stepdad. Jeffrey wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't exactly warm or caring either. He was just kind of there. He didn't talk to me, and I didn't talk to him, and honestly, that was an upgrade from what I was used to. They dated for a couple years, and when I turned 17, they got married. 2 years later, they announced they were expecting a baby. I didn't think much of it at the time, it wasn't my business, and I had my own routine to follow. But I had no idea what kind of storm was coming. At 18, I decided to take a gap year before college so I could get some work experience. In hindsight, that was a huge mistake. I should have just gone straight to school when my grandparents were still willing to cover the cost. A few months after I turned 18, everything blew up between my mom and her parents. They got into this huge fight over something so petty, I can't even remember what it was. Whatever it was bad enough that they completely stopped speaking to each other. And just like that, the financial support I'd been relying on disappeared. I was suddenly on my own. Thankfully, at the time, I had an internship, so I was at least earning a little money. Then, on my 19th birthday, I started applying to colleges. My mom was about 7 months pregnant by then, and even at that point, she hadn't said a word about what her plans were once my half-sister arrived. A week after my sister was born and my mom came back from the hospital, she and Jeffrey sat me down. They said they had something important to talk to me about. And right away, my gut told me it wasn't gonna be good. I mean, my mom never really talked to me unless it was to criticize or dismiss me, so I couldn't imagine anything positive coming out of this. Turns out, they wanted to discuss the living situation. Now that the baby was here, they said they needed to rearrange the rooms in the house. They were planning to hire a live-in nanny, and apparently, she needed her own room. We had 3 bedrooms, the master, my room, and the guest room. But instead of giving the nanny the guest room, they decided to turn that one into a nursery. And of course, their own bedroom was off-limits. So, the only logical conclusion in their eyes was that I had to move out. My mom told me, flat out, that it was time for me to leave. I was 19 now, legally an adult, and according to her, it was getting weird for me to still be living at home. She said they needed their privacy and that I should be finding my own way. I was stunned. Yeah, I was an adult on paper, but I still needed a home, especially with college just around the corner. I told her that, reminded her that I'd need a place to come back to during breaks. Her response? You can stay with your dad. But that wasn't an option. At that point, my dad was in no condition to take care of anyone. His drug use had gotten worse, way worse, and on top of that, he'd developed a serious gambling problem. His place wasn't just unstable, it was unsafe. I couldn't live there. And I couldn't go to my grandparents either, because after cutting ties with my mom, they wanted nothing to do with me. In their eyes, I was just an extension of her, and the bridge was burned on both ends. That's actually why I'd never worried about money before. My grandparents didn't just help me out for my sake, they were helping me because they were still trying to help my mom. But once their relationship with her ended, so did their support for me. I tried reaching out to them a few times, hoping to patch things up, but they wouldn't return my calls or messages. So not only was I being kicked out, but I was also suddenly staring down the reality that I'd have to figure out how to pay for college completely on my own. When I was applying, I just assumed, maybe stupidly, that my mom would help out. I mean, sure, she didn't like me, but I thought maybe college would be the silver lining. I'd be out of the house, out of her way, and that alone would be worth something to her. But when I asked her if she'd be willing to help me cover tuition, she actually laughed. Then she said she wasn't just kicking me out, she was cutting all ties. Said she'd done her time as a mother, and now that she wasn't even in touch with her parents anymore, she didn't see any reason to keep me around either. I was floored. I didn't think a person could be that heartless. I broke down crying right there, and you know what she said? She told me that if I was going to cry, I should do it outside because I was ruining the mood of what was supposed to be a happy day for their new little family. Up until that point, I'd never really stood up to her. I'd always just kept my mouth shut, avoided conflict, and tried to survive. But not that day. That day, I decided I wasn't leaving quietly. If I was getting kicked out, I was going out fighting. I told her exactly what I thought of her, that she'd always been a terrible mother, and frankly, I was relieved to finally be free of her. I said my life could only improve without her in it. She just stared at me and shrugged. Said she didn't care, that none of it mattered to her. Now that she and Jeffrey had a real daughter, they didn't need me anymore. I was just as unwanted now as I was the day I was born, maybe even more. I broke down again, and honestly, that was probably the lowest moment of my life. But after a while, I pulled myself together, packed up what little I had, and walked out of that house without looking back. I didn't have a plan, but I knew the only place I could go was my dad's. I figured, no matter how bad things were, I'd find a way to make it work. I wasn't about to let both of my parents and their failures drag me down too. But when I got to my dad's place, it was even worse than I remembered. The place was filthy, trash everywhere, dishes stacked up, and that stale smell of weed clinging to everything. It looked like no one had cleaned in weeks. And my dad? He was in rough shape. I could tell he hadn't had a job in nearly a year, and his gambling problem was bleeding him dry. The only reason he still had money at all was because his dad, my grandpa, had died a few months back and left him an inheritance. But even that was already disappearing fast. When I walked in, he tried to act happy to see me, gave me this goofy smile, but he was clearly high out of his mind. Couldn't even get a sentence out. He was holding a joint, grinning like that alone made everything okay. But I wasn't in the mood. Not after everything I'd just been through. So I walked over and smacked the joint right out of his hand. I told him, point blank, that he was going to pull himself together. That he was going to start acting like a father and finally do something right for once in my life. I wasn't about to let my dad's bad habits pull me down with him. So I told him straight up I was staying, for good. My mom had kicked me out, and now it was on him to finally step up and be the father he never really was. He needed to clean up his act, and I wasn't going to accept anything less. At first, he thought I was joking. He just leaned over to pick his joint up off the floor like none of it was serious. That's when I completely snapped. I lost control and slapped him across the face. I regretted it immediately, it wasn't something I'm proud of. But at the time, I was overwhelmed. My whole future felt like it was slipping through my fingers, and in that moment, I just broke. Right after it happened, I started apologizing, but he was furious. He didn't yell, he just stormed off into his bedroom and slammed the door. There was only one bedroom in the apartment, so I ended up crashing in the living room for the night. The next morning, he came out looking a bit clearer, more sober. He sat down and asked me what exactly had happened the night before. So I told him everything. I explained how my mom kicked me out, how I had nowhere else to go, and how I needed his help now more than ever. I told him that if I was going to have any shot at a future, I couldn't be living in chaos. That meant he couldn't keep gambling or staying high all day like it was normal. He was a little stunned. I think part of him didn't believe my mom would actually do something like that. He tried calling her to ask about it, but she never answered. And that's when it was settled I would be staying with him. We both knew he didn't have the money to send me to college, but he promised me he'd try to do better. That slap, strangely enough, seemed to shake something loose in him. It was like he finally realized how far he'd fallen. It definitely wasn't smooth sailing from there. The road was rough, and he fell back into his old habits more than once over the next couple of years. But I stuck around. I kept reminding him of the promise he made to try to keep pushing forward. That's all I asked of him. I couldn't go to college, but I also couldn't just sit around doing nothing. So I started applying to internships and got accepted to a few. They paid okay, not great, but enough to get by. The real issue was, if I did start college, I'd have to quit working, and then I'd have no income. I didn't feel safe taking out student loans either. My dad's situation was too unstable at the time, and I didn't want to trap myself in debt with no backup plan. So I kept working. And when I wasn't working, I was cleaning the apartment, cooking, keeping things in order. I refused to let my dad live in that same filth and mess he'd gotten used to. He was job hunting too, but it was a lot harder for him. He hadn't worked in years, and his reputation wasn't great. Former employers knew he used to show up high. So finding anything steady was frustrating. I think it hurt him, watching me bring in money while he couldn't. But we didn't have a choice. We had to make it work, together. Then finally, about 3 years ago, things started to change. At the time, my dad had found a job as a store manager. The hours were long and the pay was barely enough, but it was something. I was working as an accountant, which paid a little better, but it was a dull, repetitive desk job. Still, we were holding it together. Then one day, I got a call from an old friend, Aggie. We'd known each other since middle school. After her parents divorced, she moved to another state with her dad, but she always came back for the holidays, and we'd catch up then. She knew everything I'd been through. In fact, at one point, she'd even offered to help pay for my college. But I couldn't take her money. I just couldn't carry that debt, not even from a friend. Her dad ran a big office supply company and had just decided to expand the business by opening a new location right in my city. Aggie reached out and said they had a job opening, and she wanted me to have it. At first, I was hesitant. I asked her if she was doing it as a favor. She admitted that, yeah, her dad wouldn't normally consider someone my age for the position. But she talked him into it because she believed in me. She said she knew I had the work ethic and the drive, and she didn't just want to help me, she trusted me. She offered me the role of corporate liaison. The pay was way better than what I was making, and though it came with longer hours, I was more than willing to take that on. I also asked if there might be something available for my dad. After looking over his old work history, they offered him a job as a warehouse manager, something he actually had real experience in. And just like that, we were both employed and finally standing on solid ground. It was the first real turning point in our lives. Since then, things have only gotten better. My dad's been clean for a while now, no more weed, no more gambling. We even moved into a better home in a much nicer neighborhood, and we've been living here for the past 2 years. Life feels stable for once, and honestly, I never imagined I'd get to say that. 6 years ago, I couldn't even picture a future like this. But here I am. As for my mother, I haven't spoken to her since the day I walked out. No idea what she's been doing or how life turned out for her. But then, out of nowhere, 2 weeks ago, she reached out. Said she needed help. She sounded desperate, like something serious had gone down. And despite everything, I decided to at least hear her out. So, as it turns out, not long after I moved out, my mom quit her job. She and Jeffrey decided to start their own business, but it didn't take long for things to go south. It had been failing for a while, and for some reason, they just kept throwing money into it, even though it was clearly going nowhere. They kept investing in something that never brought any return, and eventually, they went completely broke. Now they're drowning in debt, trying to sell off everything just to pay people back, but even with all that, they're still coming up short. Apparently, my mom heard through a relative that my dad and I had moved into a better home, so she figured we were doing well now. That's when she decided to call me, completely out of the blue. Not to apologize, oh no. She just jumped right into it, saying we should let bygones be bygones and put the past behind us. She said this wasn't just about her anymore, she had a little girl now, and if I had any decency or kindness in me, I'd help them out financially. She wanted me to cover some of their debts, like that was a totally reasonable ask. I couldn't believe her nerve. After everything she'd put me through, she actually thought I'd just open my wallet and come to the rescue? Still, I decided to play along, just to mess with her a little. So on the phone, I pretended I was considering it. I told her I'd look into it, that I'd see what I could do. But the truth was, I had no plans to give her a single cent. I was just feeling a little petty, and I figured if she wanted to play games, I could play too. Over the next few days, I kept up the act. I'd talk to her, let her vent about their finances, act interested. But the whole time, I was just waiting. Waiting to see if she'd show even the tiniest bit of remorse. An apology. A single I'm sorry. But it never came. Not once. That actually made it easier for me, less guilt, less hesitation about what I was about to do. Then, 2 days ago, she finally asked me when I planned to send the money. That's when I dropped the truth on her. I told her I wasn't sending anything. That she'd been played. I reminded her of what she did to me, how she abandoned me at 19, how she treated me like I was nothing for my entire childhood. I said she had no right to expect help from me when she couldn't even muster an apology. I told her she was a selfish, cold person and a lousy mother, and the only thing she'd ever taught me was how not to be like her. Then I hung up before she could say anything. Right after that, I posted everything online. My full story. The way she raised me, how she kicked me out, and how she came crawling back years later asking for money like she was entitled to it. I even included the part where she expected me to help her without ever saying she was sorry. I wanted people to know the truth. For years, she acted like she was this sweet, accomplished woman with a perfect little family. But that was all just smoke and mirrors, and now, the mask is off. I don't feel bad about posting it. Not even a little. But my dad thinks I went too far. He said I should have just ignored her from the start instead of playing along and humiliating her. And yeah, maybe it was a little cruel. But I'll be honest, that was the point. She was cruel to me my entire life. I figured this was fair game. This isn't a movie. I'm not some selfless hero trying to take the high road. I did what I felt was right for me, and I don't regret it. Anyway, my dad was still upset, so I took your advice and sat him down to talk it through. And it actually helped. He listened. I reminded him that, growing up, I had no one. Not even him. He may have liked having me around, but he wasn't really there for me, not when it counted. That made him realize that what I did wasn't coming from a place of cruelty, it was coming from pain. Pain I'd been carrying around for most of my life. He finally understood. He stopped pushing me to apologize and admitted that while what I did wasn't exactly noble, it gave me some closure. And maybe that's what I needed more than anything. My mom hasn't reached out since. It's been about a week now. I know word's gotten around, because I've had a bunch of messages from people asking what's going on. But I'm not interested in talking about it anymore. I said what I needed to say, and that's that. I've got work to focus on, and I don't have time for the drama. Then, just a couple days ago, she finally broke the silence. Sent me a message saying she never should have trusted me and that she regretted ever having a child like me. But honestly? The feeling's mutual. I told her I would have rather grown up without a mother at all than spend my childhood with her. She said my post humiliated her so badly, she couldn't even live in the same town anymore. She and Jeffrey were moving away because the shame was too much to handle. She claimed I'd got what I wanted. But she was wrong. I didn't want anything from her. I didn't care where she ended up. She's been out of my life for years, and I intend to keep it that way. Let her move across the country for all I care. She always had a way of making everything about herself, and this was just more of the same. Honestly, I'm just relieved I won't have to see her again. Update: it's been a month now since she left. Everything's been quiet. No contact, no drama. Word is, she cut ties with most of the family too. Good for her, I guess. As for me and my dad, we're still doing great. In fact, he just got a raise at work. Things are steady. Peaceful. I can't complain.